On this Monday night, containing the contagion after 2 U.S. bank failures, the reassurances to customers.
Your deposits will be there when you need them.
And the calls for tighter regulations.
I am absolutely shocked at the swiftness of how the entire fiasco unfolded.
Turbulent times for discount airlines.
That's the way it is these days, right?
After Flair planes were seized, what's the future of low-cost carriers? Recognizing hockey history, a groundbreaking moment in the NHL 75 years ago today.
Global National with Donna Friesen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. We begin tonight with the fallout from the collapse of 2 American banks and how governments are doing all they can to reassure other banking customers. Neither Silicon Valley Bank in California nor Signature Bank in New York were big, and both largely focused on business customers with digital assets. But there is concern their demise could be contagious. At Silicon Valley Bank, people lined up today. U.S. banking regulators have assured depositors they will be paid back in full and be able to access their money to fund their businesses. In Canada, the banking regulator has taken temporary control of SVB's only Canadian subsidiary, which lends to corporate clients. We'll get to what's behind the collapse of these 2 banks in just a moment, but we begin with Jackson Proskow on how fears are being calmed.
Reassurance came just before the markets opened.
All customers who had deposits in these banks can rest assured, rest assured they'll be protected and they'll have access to their money as of today.
In a rare move, the U.S. government announced it will backstop billions of dollars in deposits at 2 failed American banks, hoping to restore confidence in the system and prevent a run on banks nationwide.
Every American should feel confident that their deposits will be there if and when they need them.
The stunning collapse of 2 banks in 3 days has spread fear from Wall Street to Main Street.
They were entrusted with our money and didn't do the job that they should have done.
There were long lines of customers outside branches of Silicon Valley Bank in California and at New York's Signature Bank, which was shuttered by regulators Sunday.
If there's any question, I want to empty my accounts and bring it to another bank.
The rapid response from Washington sent jitters through the markets over fears of a broader crisis. Shares of regional banks plummeted. Nervous investors worry the smaller banks may not be able to back their deposits.
They kind of brought out pretty overwhelming force to try to still this before it gets out of hand. I mean, it's important that the core of the financial system is not subject to much of this risk. The very biggest banks don't have these problems.
Fear is the contagion that most worries Washington. The White House is rushing to shore up the banks, insisting this is not a taxpayer-funded bailout. Deposit insurance fees will back the funds. Analysts believe the full impact of the rapid collapse may not be understood for weeks, and other small banks could still be in jeopardy. Part of restoring confidence will involve getting to the bottom of the second biggest bank failure in U.S. history. There will all but certainly be hearings and investigations. The White House suggests there's also a need for tougher regulation of the banking sector. Donna?
All right, Jackson in Washington, thanks. What's happened is a wake-up call to regulators everywhere. In the UK, bankers and regulators spent a hectic weekend trying to avert huge losses. In the end, HSBC agreed to buy Silicon Valley Bank's UK operations for £1 British in a deal that ensures customer deposits are protected. Despite that, investors dumped European banking stocks today, sending shares spiraling into their worst day in more than a year. Anne Gaviola reports on what's behind all this and the impact on Canada.
Forbes listed Silicon Valley among the best of America's banks for 2023, just days before it collapsed.
I am absolutely shocked at the swiftness of how the entire fiasco unfolded.
Rising interest rates limited tech companies' ability to raise money, forcing them to burn through their cash and pull money out of SVB. On March 8th, to fund client redemptions, SVB sold $21 billion worth of government bonds at a loss as they plummeted in value when interest rates climbed. Still strapped for cash, SVB announced the sale of $2.25 billion in stock, which sent its stock plummeting. A bank run ensued when too many customers tried to withdraw their money at the same time. Tech financier John Ruffalo analyzed how its collapse would affect Canada and shared his findings with Ottawa.
We were able to produce that data over 48 hours, which gave us the necessary statistics to understand that the impact of Canada was quite low.
Our national banking regulator has temporarily seized the assets of the loan branch of SVB in this country. Its business in Canada primarily lending to corporate clients, and the branch doesn't hold any commercial or individual deposits.
It was a very sobering moment for tech.
C100 is a global community of Canadians in tech. SVB was a foundational partner.
They would end up sponsoring events. They would provide funding to organizations and not-for-profits such as ours. They brought a lot of entrepreneurs together.
SVB's demise highlights the risk introduced in 2018 when then-President Donald Trump rolled back regulation put in place to ensure the financial crisis wouldn't happen again.
The legislation I'm signing today rolls back the crippling Dodd-Frank regulations that are crushing community banks and credit unions nationwide.
In the wake of SVB's implosion, bond markets are dramatically repricing, causing a rethink of the Bank of Canada's next moves. Many investors now betting that our central bank will cut rates by 1/4 percentage point at its April 12th meeting. Donna?
All right, Anne Gaviola in Toronto, thanks. Some breaking news out of Quebec tonight. 2 people are dead after what police are calling a serious accident involving a pickup truck and several pedestrians. It happened this afternoon in the town of Amqui in eastern Quebec, about 640 kilometers northeast of Montreal. Investigators say a man in his 60s and a man in his 70s were killed. 9 people are in the hospital, 2 of them with serious injuries. The driver of the pickup, a 38-year-old man, is being questioned by police. There's no word if this was an intentional act. Investigators are working to gather more information. A big win for a small city in southwestern Ontario. Volkswagen announced it's going to build its first North American electric vehicle battery plant in St. Thomas, Ontario. VW is the largest automaker in the world, and both the federal and provincial government ministers are calling this a major vote of confidence in Canada being a leader in the EV supply chain. Volkswagen intends to start production in 2027 in St. Thomas. No word yet on exactly how many jobs will be created, but it's expected to be in the thousands and will bring auto jobs back to an area that lost a Ford assembly plant a decade ago. Flair Airlines tried to reassure its passengers today after an extraordinary development on the weekend. 4 of its planes were seized because of overdue payments. It's casting doubt on the future of the airline and on other low-cost carriers in Canada. Touria Izri reports.
The delays may be over for the discount airline, but the debacle is exacting a heavy cost on its reputation.
If they're going to not pay their bills and lose some planes, I'm sure that's going to put an impact on who's going to book with them from now on.
An American leasing company seized 4 of Flair's planes after the company fell behind on payments. Almost 2,000 passengers were affected right at the start of the March break travel season.
I hope that Flair does do well, because if it wasn't for the prices, we wouldn't have been able to do this at all.
So that's the way it is these days, right?
The airline admits it's facing challenges, but says it has rebooked or reimbursed passengers.
This was obviously unexpected and unusual, and we needed to play catch-up.
The Edmonton-based carrier initially blamed maintenance issues until admitting it was a commercial dispute.
We were about $1 million in arrears, which is about half of one day's sales for us, so it wasn't a big amount. We didn't expect this action.
But some aviation experts were expecting it.
Pricing they were charging was very aggressive in the marketplace. Was that pricing too low to cover off the cost of leasing these airplanes? The answer probably today is yes.
Flair's recent financial troubles are shaking consumer confidence and also raising questions about the future of discount carriers, which have long struggled in Canada. There is more choice in the low-cost market than a decade ago. Flair, Canada Jetlines, Swoop, Play, and Lynx, which has just announced it's flying to Fredericton.
Is there going to be some consolidation here? Possibility exists. Again, most of these ultra low-cost carriers, none of them are publicly traded, so they're not releasing any financial numbers.
WestJet has acquired Sunwing after a tumultuous holiday season that led to the cancellation of all of its flights out of Saskatchewan.
The airlines are dividing the country up and getting to be a problem. Less choice.
And with less choice, passengers worry Canadian air travel will be more expensive and unreliable. Touria Izri, Global News, Ottawa.
In the UK, tens of thousands of junior doctors are on a 3-day strike.
Hey, restoration! Doctor retention!
British Medical Association says its doctors are overworked and underpaid while wait times and workloads have reached record highs. The walkout means operations and appointments will be cancelled for thousands of patients, and senior doctors have to cover emergency services, critical care and maternity services. Nurses and paramedics have also staged strikes in recent months in the UK, demanding better pay and working conditions. King Charles III took center stage for one of his late mother's signature events, Commonwealth Day. And while diversity and culture played a prominent role in the day's annual service, critics say it does not wash away the realities of the Commonwealth's colonial history. Our Europe Bureau Chief Crystal Goomansingh reports.
A traditional Maori haka performed for King Charles III, complete with a traditional moment of touching noses. Something he's done as prince, but not as king.
The Commonwealth has been a constant in my own life, and yet its diversity continues to amaze and inspire me.
56 nations make up the Commonwealth. It evolved out of the British Empire, though the majority of member nations are now independent.
Its near boundless potential as a force for good in the world demands our highest ambition.
The Commonwealth Day service is to highlight the member nations. It is really an association of political, cultural, and economic ties. But because the king is involved, it does come with controversy.
Either there should be no head. They don't really need a head. They've already got other people in the leadership positions. We don't need to keep highlighting this concept of bloodline and royal people.
In 2018, heads of member states honored the Queen's wish for Charles to head the Commonwealth, but it was stressed that it was a non-hereditary role. Demonstrators chanting "Not my king" were also present, as were those highlighting Commonwealth countries that have discriminatory practices, despite the group's charter promoting tolerance, respect, and religious freedom. Like all events where a royal is present, the service drew a crowd of supporting onlookers, and that is one of the intangibles offered to member states, a sense of community often seen on royal tours. Crystal Goomansingh, Global News, London.
The BBC has reversed the suspension of its highest paid personality. Gary Lineker, a soccer commentator, was taken off the air after he criticized the UK's asylum policy in a tweet. Last week, Lineker tweeted that the policy, which aims to crack down on undocumented migrants, was immeasurably cruel, and he said the language used around it was not dissimilar to that used by Germany in the 30s. The suspension caused embarrassment for the BBC over the weekend when other on-air personalities pulled out of soccer coverage in solidarity with Lineker. The Director General has apologized for the disruption and announced an independent review of the corporation's internal social media guidelines. Southern Africa hit hard for the second time in a month. Coming up, the deadly damage from Cyclone Freddy. Plus, saturated state. California braces for more rain with millions already under flood alerts. Another atmospheric river is on its way to flood-ravaged California. It's expected to move in overnight and could bring heavy rain, snow, and strong winds. There's already widespread flooding across the state. Streets turned into rivers, stranding residents, many of whom had to be rescued. The Central Coast has been particularly hard hit. A swollen river breached a levee there, inundating a farming community. Over 18 million people in California are now under flood alerts. Tonight's storm will be the 11th atmospheric river to hit that state since December. In Malawi, at least 66 people are dead after tropical cyclone Freddy ripped through southern Africa for the second time in a month. Torrential rains and landslides are also swamping parts of Malawi and Mozambique. Crews are sifting through storm debris to look for dozens of people who are still missing. Freddy is one of the strongest and longest-lasting storms ever recorded in the southern hemisphere. Now to the war in Ukraine. Ukrainian forces say they're still managing to repel Russian troops in Bakhmut, but it is a grind. The military's senior commander says soldiers are using artillery and tanks to keep Russian troops from capturing the town. It's the focal point of fighting in eastern Ukraine. Russia is attacking from several directions, but has failed to close a ring around Ukraine's defense. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says his officials believe 1,100 Russians have died in less than a week in Bakhmut. China Clipper ahead, the push to recognize one of hockey's barrier breakers. "75 years ago today, history was made on the ice. Chinese-Canadian Larry Kwong broke the color barrier to become the first non-Indigenous person of color to play in the NHL. He only played a single 1-minute-long shift for the New York Rangers. But as Heather Urix-West explains, his overall impact on the sport is something his supporters say needs to be recognized.
And he would dream about one day playing in the NHL.
Decades before these students were born, Samantha Heinz's grandfather, Larry Kwong, did something that had never been done before.
In the third period, he got the chance to jump on the ice.
And she wants to make sure this generation knows all about it.
In a predominantly white sport, you know, we can kind of share his story and talk about it and let people know that he was there and he was ready to play. But because of his race, they wouldn't let him.
I was really proud, and I said, I finally made it.
It was 75 years ago that Chinese-Canadian Larry Kwong made his debut in the NHL, skating for just a single shift with the New York Rangers. But at the end of that minute, he stepped off the ice, leaving the game forever changed.
Larry means so much to me. My parents came to Canada as refugees. When you think about him stepping on the ice, whether it's with the Rangers, with the Rovers, playing in the Quebec Senior Hockey League, and then eventually playing and coaching in Europe, he was breaking barriers everywhere.
Known as the China Clipper, Kwong was a player of exceptional speed and skill, but he was never given another chance in the league.
Jean Beliveau rated him as a great hockey player. Dickie Moore said he could do it all. Larry once scored 2 goals on Jacques Plante in 47 seconds. He had grown up in the Chinese exclusion era, and I think this was a continuation of that exclusion. There's Larry right there.
But Chad Soon doesn't believe he should be excluded anymore. It's why Soon is among those petitioning for Kwong to be inducted into Canada's Hockey Hall of Fame, so that his story as a barrier-breaking builder of the sport can be permanently recognized.
He went back down to the Trail Smoke Eaters at age 22.
And back in this classroom, students who are just now learning of Kwong's story agree.
I feel like a big story like this with like the first Asian like hockey, I feel like it should be more well known, and I'm disappointed that it's like not.
75 years after his historic achievement, it's something Larry Kwong's supporters are working hard to change. Heather Urix-West, Global News, Calgary.
And that is Global National for this Monday. I'm Donna Friesen. Tonight's Your Canada is Fish Creek Provincial Park in Calgary, Alberta. Thanks for watching. Hope to see you here again tomorrow. Bye-bye.